Yeah, we're live, guys. How's everybody doing? Today, shipped some cams out. So anybody's ordered cams recently, I have all of the cams out that have been ordered, except for an order I just got right before I got on. But that's okay. That's good. That means people are selling a cam. I got a lot more stuff coming up too. I've got some really cool shirt ideas that I'm going to do. I've got stuff for to help you guys order parts and shirts and stuff for your girls, which is good because the girls, behind every good man, that's what they say, is a good woman. I have a fantastic woman. But we're not talking about that. What we're talking about today is the video that I just posted today. Finally posted another 10-minute to 15-minute video that's not a live feed. I've been doing lots of live feeds, but I like it. I like the interaction. But the video is the 6-liter LS2 versus the 6.2, or the 6-liter LS2 versus the 6.2-liter LS3, and then how they compare when they're stock. And by stock, I mean the way that we run them, which people, if you're watching this video and you're like, yeah, but that thing's only rated at 400 horsepower. Why did it make 465? Or why did the 430 horsepower motor make 495? The reason is because we test it differently. So if you're just joining, the channel, when we run these things on the engine dyno, we don't run them the way that Chevrolet runs them when they rate them for power output. Chevrolet runs them differently than we do. They run it the way that they think it should be run, and we run it the way that we think it should be run. But they run it so that it has basically everything that it has in the car. It's not tested at the tire. It doesn't make that power at the tire. What it does is when they run it on their dyno cell, they have everything on it. They have all the accessories. They have probably have the power steering hooked up and all of that stuff. They run it at the operating temperature. They run all the air inlet system. They run it with the factory tune, with the factory computer. They run it with a full exhaust, cat back, everything. All of those things, the way that it appears in the vehicle. When we run it, I don't do that. When I run it, we run it normally with no accessories, just a Mazira electric water pump, no air inlet system, just an open throttle body. We run it colder than they do. We run it with an optimized tune so that we maximize the power output with both air, fuel, and timing. They obviously don't do that. They have to make it safe enough that anybody that's going to drive it like a knucklehead is not going to hurt it. That's what they're worried about. But it has to make the power that they're rated at the way that they run it with their tune. So that's important. That's why we make more. One of the big things is the tune, but all of these things combined, no accessories on it, no air inlet. We run essentially an open exhaust, whether I've run lots of them with stock exhaust manifolds, but basically a 2.5-inch exhaust after that, or long tube headers, and then a 3-inch exhaust. Whether we run mufflers or not doesn't seem to affect power. Only the length of the exhaust between the header and the muffler tends to change the power output, and only in a fairly narrow RPM range. But all of those things combine to allow us to make more power than it makes when it's in your late model vehicle, the way that it comes from the factory showroom. But that's why it's different. And that's why it's important. For me, I don't care which numbers that we use. If you compare it, if we went to a chassis dyno and we ran a bone stock Camaro they'd have to have the same gear and the same transmission, but you ran a bone stock Camaro, an LS2 version or an LS3 version, and then find out what both of them make at the tire run under exactly the same condition, that'd be okay too. All I'm looking for when I'm doing this, when I'm providing this, is a direct kind of back-to-back test so that we can discuss what they both do under the same conditions. And so you could run it a number of different ways. You could compare if GM would give you the data from the factory testing, and you could compare those. If you ran them on the chassis dyno, you could compare those. If we ran them on the engine dyno like we're doing, you could compare those, and that's kind of what we're doing. So you get to, it doesn't matter. We're just looking at the difference, really. I don't care so much what the number is. We just want to see where is one making more power than the other, and how much is it, relatively speaking. What are the numbers? Is one a lot more than the other? Because we have some fairly big differences here comparing the LS2 and the LS3. One of them is bigger than the other one. 6-liter versus 6.2. So even if they had exactly the same other combinations on them, the same heads, cam, and intake manifold and compression, then one of them would be making more power because it's bigger. As we know, bigger motors make more power. But there are a lot of differences. I mean, they're both aluminum motors, but one's bigger. The compression is different, and actually that favors the LS2. It's slightly bigger, 10.9 versus 10.7 for the LS3. But we have different cylinder heads on them. We have the 243 heads on the LS2, cathedral port heads, and we have the LS3 heads on the LS3, which are a rec port head. We have bigger valves, we have bigger chambers, bigger bore, so better breathing with the head. You know, there's a lot of things going on there. We have different intake manifolds. The LS2 intake manifold obviously works with the cathedral port heads, but I don't think, judging by how it does relative to the other things that we've tested on all of the intake manifold testing for the cathedral port stuff, I don't think that the LS2 is nearly as good as the LS3 is on its combination of rec port heads. So the LS3, I think, is superior in terms of intake manifold. So you have a lot of things going on there that also change the power protection and power production and the potential, basically. Because the other thing that happens is, you saw, if you've watched the video, here's a spoiler alert if you haven't watched the video, obviously the LS3 makes more power. But when we did the next jump up in modifications to it, we had to do a lot of modifications to the 6-liter to get it to make a pretty big jump in power. And the reason for that is the factory cathedral port heads are not going to support a lot of power because they flow 250 CFM or thereabouts. Whereas the factory rec port heads flow over 300 CFM. So they have a big advantage in airflow and the amount of power that they'll support. So if we just put a cam in an LS2, we get pretty good gains, but we're still limited by the fact that we have a limited amount of airflow. We also would have to change the intake manifold. Whereas on the LS3, already has really good heads, already has a really good intake manifold. And so when you put a camshaft in it, you can make lots of power. In fact, when we showed that with the right cam in it, we can make as much or more power than doing an LS2 with heads, cam, and intake manifold. So if you were to do the right ones, I think you could get up near 600, which we've done before. And you'd be hard pressed to get that with a camshaft on an LS3. But if you start changing like we did, you know, we put the Brian Tooley camshaft in it. And then once we put airflow research heads on, we did it on both of them. And we started making lots of power on both of them. And so, but still, because of the size difference, and I think ultimately the flow rate, although, you know, we could talk about this, we could argue about this, you know, aftermarket cathedral port heads like those 230 airflow research heads that we put on there can support way more than 600 horsepower. And the airflow research LS3 heads can support way more than 700 horsepower. So, you know, I think that they still have an advantage there. In fact, because we did the LS3 test with stock pistons with no valve release, we were ultimately kind of limited in what we could do in camshaft. We had enough head flow to make a lot more power. In fact, we weren't even coming close to taking advantage of what the airflow research, those Mongoose heads had to offer, those 260 cc Mongoose heads. We weren't even close to what they could do because we just couldn't put enough camshaft in it. And I would argue that even as a 6.2, we probably don't have enough displacement maybe to take advantage of what those have to offer also. But, and I think in that case, the factory intake, all those ours had been, one of the ones had been kind of port matched or fluffed up a little bit. But still, I think you run into a situation where you are limited now by other things when you have really, really good cylinder heads on them. And those LS3 airflow research heads, those are really good heads. Guys have had really good luck with those making good power. And there's a lot, and it's that way with a lot of LS3 heads. They've ported LS3 heads, whether guys are doing the factory ones or aftermarket heads, they can support so much more power than most of us would be making, especially if we just put them on an LS3, because there's just not enough motor there to utilize what all of them, what a lot of those heads have to offer. But it's a cool test. And then we were able to make, with the heads, cam, and intake on the LS2 and just the cam on the LS3, we're basically able to, on the LS3, basically able to make that much power. And in fact, a little bit more and a good bit more torque too. Also, I would argue that the cam is a big part of that, but also, you know, the displacement and the intake manifold and stuff. So we had some good stuff. So that test is up. You guys can check that out. I just did a test on the Metro also. I went over and tested the fan switch, and the fan switch is bad. When I jumpered the wire and hit the ignition key. In fact, I'm going to do a video on this for tomorrow, and hit the fan key. The fan turns on. It's fine. So the wiring is good, which I'm happy about that. I'd rather replace the inexpensive fan switch. And so I put it in a pot of boiling water, and it doesn't make connection. So I should try hitting it to see if I can get it to work. I wonder if there's a way to get those things to come back, because I wonder if it just gets sticky inside there, or what happens to make those switches go bad. I was thinking about heating it up with a torch to see, because it says, I looked up the data, and it says those things should come on around 200 degrees, 199 to 205 or 208. And since I had a pan of boiling water, and actually touched the thing down on the metal part of the pan, it should have got pretty hot. But we had boiling water in it, so it should have activated the switch, but it wasn't making, we just have our test meter on there, and then it was not making, there was no connectivity there. So that's obviously bad, but I'll put that back in there, and then we'll see. Then the fan switch will go on, which would be good. So, slowly, we're making these things all work, and we'll have some sort of usable deal in here, which will be good. And I'm excited to get it down to West Tech and start doing some dyno testing with it. So it'll be awesome. So we'll see what you guys got going on today. Kobe, I learned so much from you in the last couple of weeks of watching your videos. Well, make sure to tell like 8 or 10 million of your friends too. That would be awesome. But welcome. Optimized 2, no accessories. Super Richie should be close. I repeat terms I hear. Yeah, I hear here. My pops keep saying I don't know what I'm talking about, but I have a 6-liter and I'm doing the upgrades you mentioned in a Vortex Supercharger video. It's pretty easy to make. If your dad was a hot rod car guy and he was doing stuff with a small block Chevy, you're going to look like a hero doing it on a 6-liter, because it's, if you take a typical 350, it takes a lot to even get a 350 to make what a stock 6-liter does. You have to put like heads, cam, and intake manifold on it basically to get the small block Chevy to do what just a stock 6-liter does. So I watched the video. If you're going to turbocharge them, how much more boost would you have to run in the 6-liter to be even with the LS3? It depends on which combination you picked. But if we use the stock one, so we got 465 divided by 14.7 equals 31. So it'd be, in stock trim, it's basically 1 pound of boost difference between the two. Richard would like to see the LS2 with the same heads, cam, and intake on the LS3 to see the difference. LS2 might be down 20 horsepower and 20 foot-pounds. Let's see here. Yeah, it's if we do the calculations for specific output on the factory motor, it would make 479 versus 4. Did I put 495 on there? Yeah, so it would go from 495 to 479 on the stock one if you maintain the same specific output. As far as the 6-liter versus 6.2, the thing that would happen though on the 6.0, if you put the same heads on it, is the compression would be lower, because both of them have flat top pistons, and the LS3 has more displacement, so it also would have more compression. So the LS3 probably would be up a little bit more than that suggests. Jordan, hopefully I just answered that 6-liter versus 6.2 question for you. It's really easy to do. You just take the power output, divide it by the displacement, and then multiply it by the other displacement, and it kind of gives you an idea where you're at. Richard, do you think running an X pipe on an exhaust is worth it? It's worth it if you like that sound quality. You're not going to get much of a change in power, but it definitely sounds cool. I have an LS2 6-liter Gen 4 with aluminum block. How much can I get out of it? NA. You have to change a lot of things, as I showed you in this video, to get it to make 600 NA. You could do a stroker kit in it and make more power. The difference going from a 5.7 to a 6.0 would be more than the difference going from a 6.0 to a 6.2. One, because you're changing it 0.3 instead of 0.2, but more because you're changing it from a smaller amount to begin with. So the percentage is even bigger also. So if you understand, the 0.3 is a bigger percentage of 5.7 than 0.2 is of 6.0. Building a 6.0 as we speak. Forward Summit pistons, 243 head, stock crank. I'm deciding on what cam I want now. Planning on boosting the motor, 78, 75. I have a cam that would be good for that turbo motor, especially if this is something that you're planning on driving on the street. I mean, as like a daily driver kind of thing. Because either of the cams that I have would easily max out that turbo and also be very responsive, especially on a 6-liter. I'm curious what the so-called high-flow cats are worth. They really flow any better than a stock cat. I have MagnaFlow high-flow cats and was able to tune it to pass emission still. I think that the MagnaFlow stuff works really well. Repetitive numbers are all that matters. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie. Well, that's the thing. People want to argue about that. Well, those dyno numbers are not real. I'm like, yeah, they are real. That's as an A and then a B, they're exactly repeatable. And so we know that when we make a change, that the difference is the change. And again, guys want to argue about that. Well, this dyno says that, or this dyno says this. I said, I don't care what that dyno way across the country says on a different day, run by a different guy, and more than likely a different combination too. The times that has helped me when I've seen that is I've seen stock. There was an instance where guys were testing camshafts on a stock LS3, and they're like, yeah, it makes this much power. I'm like, that's not possible. Oh yeah, we did some camshaft design. I said, look, it's not possible. You can't make that much power with that kind of camshaft, because he told me what the specs are. I said, on an LS3. I said, it's not doing that. Oh, you just don't know. I said, no, I've run like a dozen of these, and I've run at least 50 camshafts through these. So I know what's possible, because I've run cams that just barely fit piston valve clearance. And so I've run the whole gamut of cams that will fit and know what they do. I said, there's something wrong with your setup. So what is the base number? How much power is that motor making when it's stock with a stock camshaft? And he told me, and I said, well, there's your problem. I said, you're already starting out 30 or 40 horsepower high. So there's something wrong with the weather station or whatever that guy's using to set the baseline number and to tune to have the calculations done on his dyno properly. I said, that's what's going on. I said, that's why you have such a big number on there, is because you're starting out with a big number and you're ending with a big number. And I said, maybe the gain that you're getting seems kind of realistic, but your starting point and your end point is not accurate. I said, I know, because I've talked to, not only have I run these a whole bunch, but I've talked to lots of other people that have run them on their dynos with the correct correction factor and weather station data. And here's what they do. I said, well, you know, if we're talking about 3 or 4 horsepower, whatever, so I don't care about that. But this is what they all do, and they're all really super repeatable. All the ones that I've run are within 1 or 2 numbers. And so when you do that and you see one that's 30 different, you're like, yeah, there's a problem there. And it turned out there was. He was getting data from a weather station that was over at an airport that was 20 miles away. I'm like, yeah, that's not, you can't do that. Repetitive numbers. That's right. You're all in on the LS2, Todd. Yep. Let's see here. Head cam intake fast manifold. Yeah, on an LS2, yes. I wouldn't put the fast manifold on the LS3. What year did Ford 4.6 engines go from non-PI to PI? In 99 is when they did it in the Mustang. 96, 97, 98 in the Mustang were non-PIs. And the last year ended at 225 horsepower. And then 99 came out at 260 in the Mustang. Your 2008 F-150. Your 2008 F-150 also has, if they did it still in 2008, and it had the dual plenum intake manifold, the truck manifold for it, it's a longer runner manifold that makes more low-speed power, and they have the little valve inside there that bolsters low-speed torque production around 2,500. Mains in the house. Think the factory rec ports would be a better choice than aftermarket cathedral ports on a 6-liter. I don't think that they would make as much power as a set of really good aftermarket cathedral port heads on a 6-liter, but they're definitely going to be less expensive. Podcast, you're welcome. Seems weird to me to hear the people putting straight water in a radiator. Well, here in California, we can. ES7875 on my L29, T4 divider or V-band inlet. They offer all three. I'm building piping so I can go to anyone. There's no performance advantage there. If you have a 7875 on an L29, you're fine. So whatever you want to pick there is fine. You're not going to have a problem spooling that turbo up because it makes a lot of low-speed power. Todd, I have a cam for you already, man. L29 head swap, keep the stock or use Edelbrock with a 100cc chamber to keep compression, maybe aluminum helps the detonation. Yes, definitely. The Edelbrock oval head is going to be better than the factory one, and aluminum is definitely going to be better. 05C6. You have a cathedral port, and you want to know if LS3 heads are worth upgrading to. Yeah, it's not an inexpensive deal unless you can find the LS3 heads, because you have to change the heads, the intake, and the rockers for the LS3. But it will definitely make more power than the factory cathedral port heads on your C6. Did you ever do an LS7 versus LS2? Wonder what kind of difference that the displacement makes. Is it more than this test? Yeah, because the LS7 is rated at way more power than either one of these. But I don't know if I've ever run a factory LS7. I don't think I have. I'd have to go back and look and see if anybody else did. I think Freiberger ran one there. Building an LS3 with BTR Stage 2. Using stock LS3 heads and a truck intake manifold. The truck intake manifold, the LY6 one that I tested, made exactly the same power as the LS3 intake manifold. I was going to throw a Chevy under the bus, but my 78 Camaro with a built 350 took out 130 mile an hour speedometer, 3 transmissions and 2 rear end gears. Nice. Looks like I'll have to press the modular power hub onto this M90. The belt keeps slipping off on the inside. Does the modular power pulley hub have gates on either side of it, like, you know, taller sections on either side to keep the thing? The other thing I would look at it is it at an angle, or is it like is the blower at an angle relative to the the pulley relative to the belt, and is it in the wrong position fore and aft? I raced an LS7 Corvette at the track with my LS2 GTO. He beat me by a second. Well, an LS7 Corvette is 500 horsepower, and the LS2 is 400, and the LS3 is like 435 or 430. The LY6 intake is the one I have, and it was free. That's good. Like I said, I tested it a few different times, and it always made exactly the same power curve, everything. Is the LY6 the preferred 6-liter to look at on the used market? I don't know that that's the case. Any 6-liter would be fine, but a later one that has rec port heads is good. That's what the adapter plate that Tom Demuse made. Tom's stuff worked pretty good on ours, on all the testing I did. LY6 is a Gen 4, makes more power than Gen 3. It makes more power than the Gen 3 LQ4 or LQ9 because it has rec port heads. Finally got the Hemi together by the end. Might finally get the Hemi together by the end of June. Might do a Speedway 27 Model T. Is going to do the Dakota, but the frame might be gone. My 85 Z28 couldn't keep up with my Ford truck. The rib's on the pulley end, and so there's only like 85% of the belts on the rib. Uh-oh. I want the custom Grand 3800 cam when you're done. It must say Super Richie on it, though. Injector size for a 700 horsepower L29. You need 80s. 80s will get you. And do you want 700 at the tire, or do you want 700 at the flywheel? 80s will do either one of those. In fact, 80s would do 700 flywheel with E85 if you're going to run that, but I don't know if you're going to. Injector size. I think I just had bad luck. I thought about loosening the bolts and hold the supercharger to the plate and seeing if I can push the supercharger back. There should be a little bit of movement available in the lower manifold. Do you have a low ram on there or something? Do boost controllers actually work? Yes, they definitely do work. And you can feel a difference because you can get the boost to hold all the way across if you have enough wastegate and you have enough boost and you have enough flow from the turbo that you have. And also the nice thing that happens at the very beginning of the curve is when you have just a manual controller like a bleed valve and the wastegate, is it actually starts opening before it gets to that boost number. And with an electronic controller, it holds that wastegate shut until you reach that number, and then it opens up. So in that area, while it's climbing up to where the wastegate opens, you get a pretty good power gain there. I don't think there's very much clearance in the bolt holes. It's a low ram. How low can you go? Do rec port heads seem lazy on a 4-inch board to anyone else on the track? They definitely seem slower than the cathedral ports. Have you tested them back to back on the track to make that statement? Whenever we run them on the dyno, a stock rec port head always makes a lot more power than it'd be noticeable at the track. It'd be 20 or 30 horsepower. It'll be softer down low. And especially if you're comparing it to a 799 head, which has a smaller chamber. If you compared it, like if you took an LQ9 or an LQ4 and took the 317 heads off and put rec port heads on, it'd be a lot faster everywhere. you know, off idle, whatever your stall converter is. My plan is to get the Hemi on the dyno by next spring. I honestly can't wait. I know, I'm excited. I'm excited about the 3-cylinder Metro. 3-cylinder Metro power. So what I was figuring I'm going to do is, if I can get the truck running right, and whether I can get that running right, I'm sure I can. But I'm going to I bought a 255 pump for that. So I'm going to put that in, and I can take that pump out of the truck and use that pump to put in the Metro. That will be my Metro fuel pump upgrade. Because, you know, Metro racing is life, right? 3-cylinder power. 3 cylinders of pavement ripping torque. I'm trying to think, when I ran both the LS2 and the LS3, I'm trying to think of which one of those I ran more testing with. It would be interesting. I need to go back and look through all the data and see. I'm thinking I ran more with the LS3, but I did a lot of testing because I remember counting the number of, back then I was doing magazine stories, and the number of magazine stories I did on the LS2, it was getting up near 20, because you just, you know, I kept doing them because I had that motor. So we would do nitrous and blowers. I did a bunch of vortex stuff on it, a bunch of different intake manifolds, a bunch of different camshafts, ported heads. I think Brian Tooley did some some total engineer flow 243 heads, and those will support a lot of power. I had PRC heads and fast 102, and it was 0.3 faster and had more mile an hour than my buddy's LS3 headed 6-liter. Both were 6 liters. Well, yeah. If you had ported cathedral port heads, I thought the discussion was rec port versus cathedral port. Have you heard or done the 411 ECM swap on Vortec trucks so you can tune with HB tuners? So why can't you? You mean I'm confused. A Vortec truck like the L31, the throttle body injected stuff? Want to do a universal turbo on my 2015 C300 project. It has a turbo, but it looks like the whole turbo is connected with the exhaust manifold from the factory. I can't get universal. I don't know what that is. Is a C300? Is that a Mercedes or something? The only way is up with an entry-level Suzuki G Series motor, and especially the XFI. Will the Metro be faster around the track than a C3 Corvette? I don't think it would be faster around the track than a garbage truck. If you already have a turbo on your C300, then you should be able to turn the boost up. You just have to reprogram it. I'm sure somebody has flash tunes for that, and then because they do, the computer controls the boost level. This Metro is not gonna, it's definitely not going to be fast. It's not going to, it doesn't make a lot of power, and it would handle terribly right now. A C3 Corvette, like a late 80s C3 Corvette, or a modified, even an early one, even a 1970 car, with the right suspension stuff on. And Dick Goldstrand used to get those things to handle really well. What they need is a lot of tire on them, and when you put tire on them, you could put lots of spring rate in them, bars, shocks, all the stuff you need. I have a 632 blueprint having issue with the valve springs. What issue are you having? Are you getting into valve float or something? What heads did you replace the blueprint heads with? I would put airflow research on this, definitely. I don't know if Blueprint has a head that will feed a really good 632, although I thought that they had some. I think when West Tech was testing them, I don't know if they were testing 632s or 598s. What's your top tips for YouTubers trying to have a big platform like you do? I don't have a big platform. You need to talk to Garrett. You need to talk to guys that have big platforms. This is not that. And there's nothing that anybody from YouTube is going to be able to tell you that's going to be some secret that's going to let you get lots of views. You have to make good content, and you have to make stuff that people want to see, that's unique. You don't want to be like everybody else. You just want to do your thing, and you want to do it with style, and you need to figure out what people want, and you need to give it to them. I don't really do that, which is why I don't have 1 million subs, because I give them the things that I give them the things that I think that they should have, rather than the things that they probably want. A lot of times. I think the Metro has at least one bad front strut, and the other one didn't feel terrible, but it feels like I could compress the spring all the way just by pushing down on it. Maybe because I'm like super yoked and I could just squash that thing. But when you release it bounces quite a bit. There's not really much control. When we see videos on the Australian V12 you had at LS Fest, I didn't have an Australian one. This was done in the United States, but I'm going to work as soon as we dyno test it. I'll be doing videos on it. If I do the Speedway Model T, I'm definitely going to put a roll cage in it. That's probably a good idea, having ridden in one of those. Good tires and brake pads go a long way on a C3. Tires are the biggest advance since the 60s and 70s. Yeah, you don't want to put an old bias ply deal on there. I remember when my buddy's Camaro or Firebird, he had a Firebird, had radial tuned suspension. It's full race. Yeah, look at like an 84 Corvette when they put the Goodyear Gator backs on it in 255 at 16s. That was all the tire in the world. Those were gigantic steamroller tires, and they made a big difference in the way that car handled. And then now they're just, it's ridiculous. I remember looking at because if you look at Lamborghinis and Ferraris back in the day, they had Pirelli P7s, which is nothing compared to what tires are now. But back then, and they were expensive, but they were pretty good, especially for then. Oh, we don't even have a poll. Come on, what's going on? Okay, would you choose to just add boost to a 6-liter rather than spend money on an NA aluminum 6-liter or 6.2? We're going to put... Okay. Would you just add boost to an iron 6-liter rather than spend money on an NA aluminum 6-liter or 6.2? So would you pick an iron 6-liter with boost rather than spend the money on building up an NA, the fancy aluminum motors? The roll cage might also add enough weight to feel less sketchy with 440 horsepower V8. Yeah, those cars are not. I mean, even though I think the one that I ran in had a small block in it, but it did not feel safe. C3 didn't have a lot of horsepower, but always had good torque numbers. Well, they had big blocks in them, in some of them, in the early 70s. What springs would you match for the 219 camshaft? I don't know. There are lots of people that have 600 lift springs, so that's really all that you need. Anything that will handle 600 lift. There's lots of dual springs out there, or some single beehives. Iron heads or just iron block with aluminum heads. Well, if you're picking a 6-liter iron block, you're gonna get aluminum heads with it. C4 Corvettes are not making much money these days. The early C3 had L88, LS6, LS7. Yeah, they never had LS7s from the factory, but 9 votes and it's 100%. Nice. Boost is cheap. That's right. If I was staying in NA, I'd go for the aluminum or putting it in a small car, maybe like a Metro. Like the Metropolis. LS7 was on the build code list. Yeah, they didn't ever put an LS7 in anything. That was a crate motor. They run a Mustang staggered set on 17s from Monte Carlo, 235s and 275s. I remember when they stepped up to the 17-inch wheels on the Corvettes, I thought, wow, those are monsters. 275s, those are huge. Is the LS7 the most powerful factory LS? No, the supercharged ones are more than that. Do you like a beehive or dual spring? I like a dual spring, although that camshaft is being only a 219-degree duration camshaft. It's not going to run a lot of RPM. So if you have a good beehive spring, it will work with that. We used to boost AMC 304s, cheap power, thick walls. There you go. They go for the middle bore size between stock and max for a 6-liter. We don't normally go on an iron block. We don't go more than 30 usually. And there's no need to when you have boost. Why make it weaker when you can always make more power with the turbo? My father's 63 Ford Galaxy would burn the tires right off the rims. I only say no because packaging and purposes for my Jeep keeps it NA and aluminum to add lightness. Yep. What is your answer on the poll? Yeah, I would pick a turbo. I don't even know if I can't find a 6-liter, I'd just do a 5.3 because a turbo 5.3 would make more than any of those are going to make NA by a lot. ZL1 C3 Corvette. Yep. All aluminum 427. When did C3 start? Was that 68? It's 528-pound valve spring. Too much for a hydraulic roller, retrofit roller for a big block. What is the seat pressure? 66 is not a C3. '68 is when they started the new body style. Isn't that the C3? .528 seems like it's getting into solid roller territory. And at what lift is that? Oh, so is the 528 the rate then? 133 and 414. Yeah, that's fine. 133 you might find is a little light. I'd like it to be 150 or 160, and then 414 would be fine. 442 ECM swap is on L29 Vortec. They say it's faster processing ECM and works with HP tuners as well. Oh, okay. So you're going to do an LS swap onto the L29. Are you doing, because they had on the later ones or on the L21, they had coil packs on those. So are you going to put coil packs on it? I'm a fan of the C1. I'm actually, I mean, I like the way that they look, but if you've ever been in like a 62 Corvette or something, they ride like trucks. What oil pump, cam, and lifters do you recommend for a Yukon Denali? Well, the thing that I would talk about the most, I would put a stock pump in it, and we always run stock lifters in them. But what cam and what are you trying to do with this Yukon Denali? Would you boost a 4.8 you have, or spend the money on a 5.3 then boost it? It depends on what you're trying to get done. Like what is your goal? A 4.8 with a turbo will make a lot of power. I mean, you can do 1,000 horsepower with a 4.8 in a turbo. It's just not as responsive as a 5.3. So it depends on what your goals are on both sides of that equation. When the LS platform was fairly new, I remember reading that people were having issues with stroking their motors with the piston rocking at the bottom of the bore. I could see that happening with standard sleeve lengths and going beyond 4-inch strokes. Guys are putting 4.100s and 4.125 strokes in them, and then that definitely is an issue. Five threes are a dime a dozen in the wrecking yard, so if you can find a good one, grab it and go. They are cheap and they're easy to find. And if I was going to the wrecking yard, I would pick a 5.3 over a 4.8 if I don't have anything. If you already have a 4.8 and you're just putting boost to it, you definitely can do that. If you'll like the 5.3 better if you're driving it around town because it's going to be more responsive. Drop some Marvel Mystery Oil in it. And if you want to clean the lifters out, you could also run transmission fluid through it. I want a little bit more power. So like a Truck Norris cam or the low buck truck one that I have, like that kind of little bit more power. What's the motor in your Denali? Is it a 6-liter or is it 6.2? Yeah, Dylan, the 4.8 and 5.3 run really smooth. I like running turbos with a stock cam. The thing just sits there and idles like at 600 RPM. Doesn't really make any noise. It makes a lot of torque. It's got good response. .62. Yeah, so a Truck Norris cam or the low buck truck that I have in a 6.2 is going to be a good combination. What's your favorite roller cam for a big block 10-to-1 single plane FR 325s? Well, the cam is going to help you dictate. I don't know how much power you want to make. Are you trying to max out the airflow heads? With 10-to-1, you're not going to max it out. Or are you going to drive this around? Is it going to be a solid roller deal? Is it going to be a race car? What is it going to be? A stock cam turbo 5.3. It idles too quiet. It is really quiet. We've had them before where you don't know that the motor is on, particularly when we run them NA first with headers and exhaust and mufflers on it, and the thing is sitting there idling like I said, it's 600 or 700 RPM. You're like, you only know because you have to look at the tack that's on the dyno and go, and especially if I wear ear protection on everything, especially if you have that on, you're like, I can't hear anything. Streetcar hydraulic roller. But you want it to have enough camshaft to make power, right? So something like a 242, 248 probably on the big block like that. So BMW 3 Series sounds like a stock Silverado. Like to be 650 at the flywheel. And what size was this? Oh, a 540. Yeah, that's not a problem. I think that 540 that we did, the Blueprint 540, the low compression one with their heads on it, and a single plane manifold and the carburetor on it, I think it was right at 650. And that was with that was actually with that solid roller. It was a 255 262. I think I'd put something a little smaller in that, and the airflow heads are going to be better than the Blueprint heads are. And yours probably has compression. This was 8-to-1. If you have the AC crank, you won't realize it's on until you put it in drive and it doesn't move. On the Metro particularly, but the Metro doesn't have AC. The windows barely roll up and down. In fact, they don't roll exactly up and down. So the cam that he had didn't have a good enough closing. It had too aggressive of a closing ramp. You replied, rec port heads make more power, but it's across the board. Well, you need to tell me, that's not a universal thing. You need to tell me which cathedral port head you're talking about and which rec port head you're talking about and on what application. And then on what RPM range do you want to run the test on? Oh, I meant on the 4.53 trucks. I have the AC on a 5.3 truck. Mine drives fine, although it's pulling lots of timing. But 243 is on a 6.2. Yeah, I can tell you what happened when we tested 799s. That's the same as a 243. What the heck? How about no? Okay. LS3 versus 799. Okay. Okay, the factory rec port heads made about 20 horsepower more, starting at 4,300 RPM. The 799 heads made a little bit more torque below that, down at 3,000. The difference was 93, was 15 foot-pounds. And that was on a 6-liter and not a 6.2. That was an LY6. The cam was a reground, and they set the lash to the original card before they reground it. American Engines is selling several 243 headsets. 4L80 or Turbo 400 in stock configuration for power. I don't know what you mean. The power consideration is not what I would be choosing either of those two transmissions for. I will be picking on whether or not I would want an overdrive. Custom grind cam from Prey Performance, supposed to give better low end than a Truck Norris. Not sure if you're familiar. A stock cam gets better low end than a Truck Norris 2 at 2,000 RPM, if that's what you want. But it makes less power everywhere else. And so we know what cams do. Did you tell me to email you about a Truck Norris cam, or was that a scam? Yeah, I have cams if you're looking for a cam. I have a low buck truck cam, and it's 179 if you got an email from me or sent me an email. meant to say you won't notice that the truck is on or off with the AC cranked up until you put it in drive and not move because of how smooth and quiet the engines are. Yeah, they are good. The valves were bouncing, that they were hitting the pistons. Yeah, that's a valve, certainly a valve control issue. Going to my first drift event. Alan, yeah, just send me an email if you're interested in a cam. Going to my first drift event Saturday, welded diff. Hope the setup works good. Stock cam, turbo 5.3, swap BMW. As long as you're not bouncing it off the rev limiter all the time. I have one of each, an LS3, an LS2, and an iron 6-liter. Nice. Jim, a 6-cylinder 292 with an LS1 piston and long rods and 799 LS head. So is that what you're building or something? I don't know what your comment means. The 292 Chevy has that bore spacing? Uh-oh, they're popping all the balloons down there. I need an LS3 for my 81 Corvette. Boost makes everything better. Yeah. Now the truck 16 for 1,700. I need to get rid of AFM or DVD. It depends on what year it is. We'll be back tonight. Go eat, Eric. Why are you guys killing all the balloons? Trying to look something up here. Pontiac 6-cylinder, the Sprint motor. trying to see anything. I can't find anything in the bore spacing here. I like going to other people's websites and finding my pictures on there. Interesting. Coolio. Let's see what we got going on here. Richard, just did heads cam intake on my LS2. My valve train sounds like a V8 typewriter sewing machine. I'm going to replace rockers and lifters. The rockers don't quiet down. Any suggestions? Have you checked to make sure that there's not lash in there? Oh, it is time to go. Oh, wow. 2 more minutes. Would you just add boost to an iron 6-liter rather than spend the money on aluminum 6-liter? 85% are saying yes. Trying to decide on either a C8 Stingray with heads cam intake versus a 2650 Lingenfelter package on a C8 Z06. I think I would, I mean, the other motor is cool, but I think I would pick a blower. Have you ever built a big block tall deck one? I haven't. Are there any benefits or drawbacks to building one for boost? I think you were going to run into intake manifold fitment problems and availability, and also just the height of fitting it in stuff. There's really no need to do that unless you already have it and you want to do something different, because you can make lots of power with boost on any big block. Will you be building a 7.4 liter LSX for the dyno anytime soon? I don't know what you mean by that. Are you talking about a 454? I have a 454 video up that Brian Tooley did. Speaking of C4s with crossfire, besides TPI, could TBI, as in what was found in the pickup trucks, be fixed? It's limited in the computers are really limited. The airflow of the throttle bodies were limited. The manifolds were limited. It had bad cylinder heads on it. It had mild cams. It had all kinds of problems. Richard, have you tested the Gen 5 intake manifold against the LXR Fast? Does Fast make an intake manifold for the LT motors? Northern, you don't have to worry about being too hot or especially too cold on the plug. Just put them in there and run it. It'll be fine. I don't know about you, Boy Wonder. I don't know what you mean by thoughts. Who is it that had the upside down 4-hole carb spacer test? We've run that before where we flipped a tapered combo spacer upside down. I'd have to go back and look, and we probably did it on a small block Chevy, I think. And whether or not it worked, it's not a universal thing. It depends on what you're testing it on. Longer rod is the advantage of the tall deck. I don't agree with that. I don't think rod length really or rod ratio should even be considered when you're talking about building a turbo big block Chevy, because it's not, that doesn't really come into play. And on that note, it is time to go, but I will see you guys all later. Late.